Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders. Sometime this week.
She's Heather.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
As far as I know.
She's still Heather,
But
y'all.
I would not count on me knowing who I am.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it.
My brain feels broken. I'm just really glad that stuff's wrapped up. I guess I'll just say that.
That's right. And I agree with that.
But it still makes my head hurt. And I don't even want to talk about it. All right, Dylan, we are going to discuss a true crime documentary today.
Oh, okay.
Once in a while we do that.
I can't wait.
It's like our Mountain Murders movie club, right? So I thought today we could talk about Jailbreak, Love on the Run.
I gotta say, I've been watching a lot of docs lately, and this was a pretty good documentary because I learned a lot about this case. I thought I knew everything I needed to know about it, and I came to some revelations watching this.
Some revelations. Dang, all right.
I realized some things.
Well, in April of 2022, a corrections officer named Vicky White helped a felon named Casey White escape from jail. I remember this being on the news.
I remember.
And I had a lot of thoughts about what was going on. And this documentary really changed my point of view, or I became more knowledgeable on the subject, I guess I should say.
I agree completely. I feel the same way.
So Casey White, is like this violent felon. And somehow this very straight-laced law enforcement officer, I mean, she's a corrections officer, right? So that would be considered law enforcement, right?
Yeah, but it's in the correctional side of that, and she's like an administrator, so she's been doing this all her life, and
by the way, the pair are not related.
No, they're
even
not.
though they share the same last name.
Maybe that's what started.
And the
romance.
story takes place in Alabama, so I just didn't want people to have the wrong idea. And then there's little stereotypes out there.
It's true.
Wrong stereotypes.
Well, you know what they say about stereotypes, that most of the time they're not true.
Okay.
That's what I say about it.
I always say they're a real time saver. Now, the pair, like I said, they were not related when Casey, who was 41 at the time, met Vicky, who was 56. Casey was actually extradited to the Alabama jail where Vicky was employed. And for more than a year, these two developed a relationship, a romantic relationship, leading to the eventual escape. Vicky broke Casey out of jail, basically.
Yeah, it was like some Old West shit, you know? She just busted him out of jail.
Well, then the couple went on the run for 11 days before it all came crashing down. They ended up in a car chase with police, and there was this big accident, and Vicky died. Now, this case is the subject of this new Netflix documentary called Jailbreak, Love on the Run, which features previously unreleased audio recordings and video of Vicky and Casey, including both the jailhouse communications and like even her final words to him.
Yeah, I was kind of blown away with, I think, the audio, because there's a whole lot of, once they realized that Vicky had a burner number, if you will, that they were not aware of, and they made the connections, they found out that there was tons of I want to say 1,000 plus of calls, communications between them over this time, over the jail line, and it's been recorded and was just, hiding in the system somewhere.
Was she putting money on his J-Pay so he could make calls?
She was doing a lot for him. Sneaking, giving him extra commissary.
We're going to get to all that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. So a little bit about Vicky. Her name was Vicky Sue Davis originally, and she was born on August 19th of 1965. She married her first husband, Tommy, in 2002, and they ended up divorcing in 2006, mainly because of his drug abuse. And they remained friends. Vicky, I guess due to her husband's substance abuse issues, was pretty against drugs. So that's something that kind of comes into play in the documentary as well, as far as Casey goes. But then she became engaged to this other guy. He ended up dying in a car wreck before they ever got married. And at that point, Vicky, who had no children, just sort of became her job, it sounds like. She really poured herself into her work and had not a lot of life outside of work. It sounds like when she went home in the evenings, she was kind of lonely and started drinking. But she swore off men. Like, she felt like love wasn't for her. She wasn't going to meet anybody. She was never going to remarry.
Right.
She was kind of done with it all.
Yeah, and she's just a I guess you could call her a workaholic. You know, she was known to put in 60+ hours every week. She was, everyone turned to her for help at the facility. She was a big part of making that place run right, and a lot of people looked up to her.
Vicky was a corrections officer at Lauderdale County Detention Center, which is in Florence, Alabama, and she rose to the rank of assistant director of operations, which is a pretty good job. I mean, that requires a lot of knowledge, hard work. During her 17 years at the facility, she won Employee of the Year 4 times.
Wow.
And it's a pretty tough job if you think about it. And Vicky did that for 17 years and earned her way up to this position where she had a lot of respect. She had a lot of power. And if you think about it, I mean, it's pretty commendable because a lot of people, I would say the majority of people who work in corrections don't last that long. The burnout is pretty high.
They have a notoriously high burnout rate for obvious reasons. It's a high stress environment. You know, you got a lot going on. You know, I've heard in other documentaries and crime shows, I've heard corrections officers talk about how they have to get in this mindset of going to work to be more like thinking and preparing more like an inmate or the people they're going to be dealing with.
Yeah.
Even in positive contacts, they have to be in like have their game face on. And when they go home...
And you're on high alert, like the whole time you're there.
Yeah. And when they go home, they have to make a concerted effort to turn that off because they're in a completely different vibe and attitude when they're at work the entire time. You know, and you're kind of, I don't know what you would call it, pumped up, ready for anything at any moment. But at the same time, you got to balance that with doing your job and also not being cruel to people.
But yeah, being vigilant, but not being cruel or a bully. I mean, it just would take a certain type of person, I think, to work in that field.
And in many studies, famously the Stanford prison study, there's also some dynamics that go into like the psychology of just humans, of you getting power hungry, and yeah, I mean you can look it up. It's been proven time and again that can really go to your head being in a position like that, even on the lowest level.
So like you said, Dylan, Vicky was working like 50 to 60 hours a week, and she was considered the go-to person for any questions or needs within the detention facility. Her fellow correction officers, as well as several inmates, described her as actually treating the inmates as human beings. She exercised a lot of kindness and compassion.
Well,
which, you know, is not super common.
They called her mom. A lot of them considered to a lot of these men who didn't have strong parental figures, she was a mother figure.
Well, one of her coworkers said in the documentary, she just wanted to take care of people, but who's taking care of Vicky? So it sounds like Vicky's, you know, pouring herself into everyone else, but her cup is empty, which is probably how, or at least some of the reasons she ended up in the position she found herself in. So in April of 2022, Vicky announced her retirement with just 1 day's notice, which really surprised the entire staff. A month earlier, she had sold her home for a lot less than the reported value. She sold it for $95,000 and had been living with her mother. And according to the documentary, she also purchased several firearms from a Walmart in Huntsville over a period of several months.
Yeah, and she was also doing strange things like once they figured out later, she would go do her normal shopping at like Walmart or a place like Walmart, and she would buy one piece of camping gear. She wouldn't go, but she didn't go on one trip and buy all this gear. She would buy one thing, and later on they figured out she was kind of, because see, what we have to remember is Vicky knows about investigators. She knows about the system. She knows how it works inside and out. And so she was doing things in a way to keep everything under the radar, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
Casey Cole White was born August 20th of 1983, and Casey is 6'9". This guy is enormous.
And he's not a string bean either. He's a big guy.
He's a big guy, broad shoulders, big old calves. Like, I was just watching this footage of him, and there's one scene where he's in like a medical, almost bay kind of area, and I guess in the jail. And the dude's calves and I mean, he's just a big dude. He's huge.
He is just a tremendously large man.
And he has a lot of tattoos, including Confederate flag and a lot of white supremacist symbols. Like, Casey, bro, what were you thinking?
She likes her boys inked up.
I guess, but not with those tattoos.
Well, no, you need some cover-ups. You need
mean,
some teddy bears over that stuff.
Bro, you shouldn't be putting that shit on your body. So by the time Casey met Vicky as an inmate at the Lauderdale County Detention Center, he had a pretty long, lengthy rap sheet, violent criminal history dating back nearly a decade.
Yeah, even the little crime spree that landed him there was very violent. You're talking about a guy who, you know, shot people.
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a terrifying, I mean, just this man does not mind perpetrating violence on the public at all.
Well, Dylan, in 2012, he was sent to prison for 3 years for beating his brother with the handle of a, like, sledgehammer. Like an axe sledgehammer.
Okay, some old hickory-handled piece of chunk of wood.
In 2016, Casey was convicted of 7 of 15 related counts related to a crime spree from the year earlier, including carjacking, robbery, home invasion, and attempted murder. So he was sentenced to 75 years in prison for those 2016 convictions. And so it's while serving his sentence at William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in 2020 that he allegedly confessed to killing 59-year-old Connie Ridgway. Despite his confession, he pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of capital murder in that case. And that's when he was extradited to Lauderdale County and was awaiting trial for the Ridgway murder.
So he's had this crime spree. He's already gotten 75 years, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
For this whole other matter. And now he's awaiting a new trial for a capital murder charge.
Yes.
So this guy basically is going to end up in jail for life. I mean, 75 years, even if you get paroled or out with good behavior, you're still talking, I don't even know, 30 plus years you're probably going to serve on that. So he's already staring down.
He's going to be an old man when he gets out of jail.
An old man if he's lucky, and likely if he gets convicted.
He's not that much younger than us.
Right. He's not a spring chicken. So, and if he gets a capital murder charge on top of that, it's life for sure for this guy. If he's lucky, it's not death.
So while he's in this detention center, he unsuccessfully attempted to escape at least once back in 2020 with a shank.
Oh, God.
Like a spicy lamb shank?
No. Yeah, I'm sure it was a spicy lamb. I think that, you think that would convince someone to let you escape if you had some spicy meat?
Maybe. I don't know. It just makes me think of, there's like an old Alfred Hitchcock. I used to watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents on Nick at Night when I was a kid, because that's how old I am. And there was this one episode where I think it was a woman beat her husband to death with a frozen, like, rack of lamb or leg of lamb or something.
Oh, God.
And killed him, like bludgeoned him. And then the cops come and they're trying to investigate, and she ends up serving them the lamb for dinner, like feeding these detectives.
The murder weapon?
Yeah.
Dude, what a twist.
I know. As a kid, I was like, whoa. Melted my mind. Now, because of crowding issues, when Casey was in Lauderdale County, he was put into A1 cell, which was an area that Vicky oversaw. So in this documentary, other inmates and detention center workers recall Casey starting to buy love cards from the commissary and writing these love letters, but nobody knew really like who he was passing these off to or if he was mailing them out to someone. And they definitely didn't know it was Vicky.
And see, that's the thing is the inmates, what they do have is all the time in the world on their hands. And even the dumbest inmate, they notice the smallest details because that's,
Well, you're bored.
You're
There's
bored to
nothing
death.
else going on.
And everybody's in everyone else's business. And, I think that A1 cell I think they have kind of dorm-like settings where you'll have as many as 8 people in a cell. And at one time, the overcrowding was so bad that one of the guys who shared a cell with Casey said that at one time while he was there were 16 people in that 8-person cell.
Ugh.
So can you imagine being that kind of crampedness? And then you're also, everybody's in here with this giant and like you're locked in here with this giant. I would be very nervous about that. And on top of that, he's a fucking violent offender.
None of that is okay.
None of that's okay.
My claustrophobia would never.
I could smell.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say the smells.
The
I
smells.
knew it.
I don't like smelling other people. I don't.
I don't either. I don't think anybody likes smelling other people, Dylan.
And there's no way around it in a setting like that. You even got to watch them poop. People's on a poop schedule. They make you look away.
Like I had this friend, well, I mean, I guess I still do, from high school. And he's a stand-up comedian in Chicago, but he would come back to our hometown sometimes to visit his parents and would do gigs, like little comedy gigs. And so I've seen him perform a few times, and he had a bit about the like one time he was arrested in college and being taken to jail, and it was for some like underage drinking or I don't know. But then he had to poop like while they're in the holding area.
Nice.
With like 30 people. And so his whole bit was this horrific story about, and there was no toilet paper and
oh god,
just like, oh my gosh, so that's terrible. That's like my worst nightmare.
Here you are trying to poop on this little tiny toilet and somebody's looking you dead in your face.
I feel like you could make a list of ways to torture someone that are not the typical. And one of the tortures would be that you have to poop in front of like 30 people while they all make eye contact with you.
I couldn't do it, I don't think. Maybe I could after having worked in a paper mill. Because it got to a point where I worked there so much, such long hours, is like, look, I would apologize to people as I came in the bathroom. I'm sorry about this, but you might want to clear out. But I still at least had a little shitty stall around me. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
I've had bad experience. Like in boot camp, they have no curtains or doors on the stalls.
Oh my gosh.
So you have to go in front of people. And I had to develop a schedule where I would wake myself up at like 2 a.m. in the barracks and go to the bathroom in boot camp.
So you would hold your poo until you got to, once you do a schedule like that, your body gets used to it.
Yeah.
And so you would go when there's likely nobody up and around. That's very smart of you.
Yeah.
Now, I remember there used to be...
I'm sorry. I cannot poop in public.
They used to do some of the goofiest pranks in that old paper mill. And I remember one of them was they took like a pair of rubber boots because when people would come in the bathroom, you could see just under the stall door, and they had this one old guy. He would, when he had to go, he had to go. So in the 2 or 3 stalls in that one particular bathroom in that area, they put a set of rubber boots like sitting there, and like if you just glance, it looks like somebody's sitting on the toilet because all you see is the boot toes. They did it in all 3 stalls, and so this old man's about to shit himself, and he keeps going in the bathroom, and the stalls keep being full, and finally he's like, God damn it, get the hell out of here. He rips the door open, and it's just a pair, all these boots sitting there.
That's pretty.
And I
funny.
thought that was a pretty damn funny.
It's a pretty funny prank.
Pretty funny prank.
I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty funny.
Ah, yes.
So, let's get back to our story here, Dylan. Vicky's coworkers said they never remembered ever seeing her with a man or really speaking about a man romantically, but she did tell them back in December of 2021 that she was juggling 2 men.
Ooh.
So then it was later revealed that Vicky and Casey began communicating by phone, including having phone sex. And that's the thing, Dylan. There were like hours of these phone sex conversations. And her coworkers, like her boss, had to listen after all is said and done to these conversations.
Yeah.
And you could tell the fellow that was in charge, he was just like, nobody wants to hear this from their employee.
No, and I got to say they did at times play some little excerpts of that.
Yeah.
Some of the more, I'm going to guess, PG parts of it. And I got to say, it's funny because
It's kind of cringy. It's cringy to listen to other people's
yes, but
pillow talk.
you have this older woman, she's nearly 60, and then this kind of younger guy, and
Like, you got on them little shorts. I'm just like, please stop.
it's like, I just want to rub it on your leg, baby. It was some of the most kind of awkward phone sex, and it was very kind of hard to listen to. So I could imagine the people that worked with her for years respected her, and it was just probably one of the hardest things they ever did, sifting through all this conversation.
Yeah, so they had 949 phone calls between them before their escape. In Jailbreak, it was alleged that they also had physical sexual contact while Casey was in jail. And some of her coworkers were not even sure exactly how this could happen.
Right.
One of the other guards at the jail was saying how I guess there was kind of one area that if he was in this one area, maybe he didn't have a full view of her. So it's possible she could have gone in the cell with him, maybe. But
even then, there's other people in the cell.
That's the thing with it being so overcrowded. Like, I don't even know how this could happen.
Well, it's a pretty big facility, and if she's, at one point leading him from anywhere to another area, they could pop off in who knows, maybe an old office or a closet or under the stairwell,
Casey was also getting other special privileges. I mean, it sounds like he was getting some special privileges, but it included extra food. Vicky would go out of her way to sneak, little treats.
Yeah,
to the inmates, but especially him.
They would get extra commissary, and that's like a damn currency in there. You know what I mean? A bag of Lay's a little tiny bag of potato chips is, people get killed over shit like that.
I'm not cut out for jail.
I'm not cut out for jail either, and it's another conversation, but our system's really, which I gotta say, most of the time you have plenty of opportunities to avoid full-on prison for any amount of time. They've give you a million chances, and a lot of times, usually, I'd say 99% of the time, you end up there for your own actions and reasons. You kind of, earned it, but the system really is stacked against the inmate. Well, I guess it's the for-profit element of it, right? I think you have to have prisons, and I think they should only be full of bad people, and I think there's plenty of crimes that are nonviolent, and I don't think any crime's truly victimless, but there's people who probably are not a danger to society and their neighbors, no matter what they did, you know what I mean? But the prices, I'd listened to this other podcast about some corruption, and I want to say it was Mississippi. I think it was an American Greed, which is a wonderful podcast and a show. I'm sure a lot of people watch the show. Stacy Keach here. But anyway, this guy was getting kickbacks on anything, and now we're just talking about the prices, It's like, so you got these people, a captive audience. You control everything. The food, it'll keep you alive, but it's usually you seldom hear people talk about how great the food in jail is, right? It's kind of like hospital food, but even worse. And you can buy all these treats, if you will, from commissary, but these little, tiny bag of chips is like $4. And a soda is, this crazy, what prices are now for everything with inflation. But it's really taking advantage, and at times they even charge people. It was upwards of like freaking $12, $13, $14 a minute to communicate with your family. I mean, that's just really taking advantage of people who are already in a bad situation. And I think that's really wrong. It's taking advantage of them and their family, because 9 times out of 10, their family's footing the bill for all that stuff.
Well, and I mean, let's not even get into the fact that it really like preys upon the poor.
Oh, well, we know that.
So, well, the detention center was short-staffed. There were only 5 deputies working on April 29th of 2022. That was Vicky's last day, and her colleagues noticed that she was quieter than usual, even during her retirement party that the staff held for her. She wasn't her typical kind of bubbly self.
Yeah, and they were really taken aback by that because they really expected, even though that people have been asking her for years, when are you going to retire and just relax? And she was like, oh, I'm not done yet. And then out of nowhere, she drops this retirement notice, and nobody even respects it. So they want to put this little party together, and give her a good farewell. And then she's just not. Everyone noticed she's not like her usual self.
Well, on her last day, Vicky had a colleague bring Casey to booking and shackle him at 9:30 a.m., telling staff she was taking him out for this mental health evaluation at the courthouse, which could take a few hours. So they end up leaving around 9:41. But by 3:30 that afternoon, staff noticed that they had not returned, and this is taking a lot longer than usual. They contacted the Lauderdale County Sheriff, Rick Singleton, and a lead investigator, Matt Burbank, who were not at the jail that day. They immediately realized there was a problem, which was driven home further when they looked at camera footage of their exit, and they noticed that Casey walked behind Vicky and that she was alone, which broke protocol for staff escorting these violent criminals. They also were able to look back and realize she had done a trial run leading up to this.
Yeah,
just to see how it would work.
Yeah, and as the people she had trained, who they'd learned everything about how you act around inmates, noticed these things of how she was walking in front of the inmate instead of behind him at the very least. And honestly, a man that size, he's a huge, extra big man, and she's just a little woman. She's short, not very big. And
she's probably 5'1" to 5'3", maybe.
Yeah,
she's a very petite woman.
100 and some pounds, and she should never, ever be allowed to escort this monster of a man. I don't care if it was a normal day or anything, because that is, there was a case, wasn't that in Atlanta, where that huge man, very dangerous man, assaulted that woman bailiff and got on the loose and went on another crime spree. And I think a woman, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I think a woman ended up talking him down he took her hostage and all this shit. But it's just one of those cases, people's like, well, that's sexist. No, I'm saying a damn 6'9", 300-pound man shouldn't be escorted by a guy who's 5'2", that weighs 140 pounds. That's just asking for trouble. And they noticed that Vicky was walking in front of him very nonchalantly, like she wasn't worried about anything. And that raised obvious red flags for them.
They ended up finding Vicky's patrol car deserted at a shopping center, and the pair had fled in an orange 2007 Ford Edge. That's when an arrest warrant was issued for Vicky on charges of third-degree permitting or facilitating an escape. Authorities attempted to track and chase the pair down over the course of 11 days. They tried to paint that Ford Edge, which is a bright orange, this kind of green color with spray paint, and it didn't go so well. It looked like shit, and I think people would notice a spray painted vehicle driving down the street.
Well, see,
it's not very inconspicuous.
No, and I think Vicky and her planning actually made a mistake by getting this very bright, noticeable, newer car. And but yes, what the attempt on part of the vehicle to paint it another color made it stand out way more than if you just left it alone. You know what I'm saying? Because it was very odd.
Well, they end up abandoning that car in Tennessee and buy a blue 2006 Ford F-150. They head north and stay in a few hotels. There's a lot of surveillance footage showing Vicky, and she's either wearing a wig or she's dyed her hair a darker color. Normally her hair is blonde. They end up in Evansville, Indiana, where they paid a sex offender to reserve a room for them. This unhoused individual, sex offender, to book this room for them at a motel for 2 weeks. On May 9th of 2022, a car wash employee called in a tip after they had washed their truck at this facility where he worked and just sort of abandoned this truck at this car wash.
Yeah. Just left it setting there in the bay.
So they're in a Cadillac, and you can actually see Casey leaving the truck and going over and getting in this car and driving off.
See, that's part of his problem being on the run is his size.
He's huge.
He stands out
like a sore thumb.
People remember this huge man. And then when you start splashing his face and her face everywhere, it wasn't hard for them to track them at that point. No matter how many times they swapped vehicles, eventually someone saw the news and said, "Hey, they just bought a truck from me," or "Hey, I saw these people there."
Police soon arrived at the motel where Vicky and Casey were staying. They end up fleeing in this gray Cadillac. A chase ensues, and the couple ends up driving to this grassy field before colliding with a patrol car. That's when the Cadillac flipped over into this ditch. Vicky's pinned inside. Casey, eventually, they get him out. He surrenders to police, and they find that Vicky has a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head.
And actually, I'd missed that the first time when this story was actually happening. I did not realize that she had, in her desperate moment, taken her own life.
There's an audio recording in the documentary that reveals Vicky's final words to Casey. She was scolding him for making them stay at, for I guess not, like, why did we get in this car? Like, why didn't we just stay at the motel?
Right. I think if I'm not mistaken, the OnStar, for some reason, I don't know if they initiated it or if it started recording because of maybe they'd already had a minor collision in this chase, but the OnStar was recording every word in the car, which was gruesomely fascinating.
And you could hear the gunshot. You
could hear everything.
Pop.
You could hear everything in the last moments, and you can hear the desperation in Vicky's voice. Because now she's given up her whole life, what she had built towards in her career, her retirement, everything, cashed everything in her home, and this hasn't worked. It's all coming to a head.
And now she just cannot seem to face these people that she knows, like, she's disappointed.
She would have to go back to be put in jail at the place she worked all those years.
It also seems that Vicky and Casey had made some kind of pact, Dylan, that if they were caught, Vicky would take her own life and Casey would die in a gunfight with police.
Oh, I don't think he kept up his end of the bargain.
No. I mean, what is this, like a modern day Romeo and Juliet story?
You have to be a really trusting person to make a death pact like that with someone.
It almost seems a bit naive.
Yeah, and, if you have to end, or if you have to make a pact like this at the end, or in case things go sideways, then that should maybe tell you that what you're doing is not a very healthy choice.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's not a good thing.
I think it's a very naive way of thinking that you can get so caught up in your emotions and feelings and this fairy tale love story that you've kind of painted for yourself. You're willing to overlook just the most basic things. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but I mean, it's like you have this very basic notion that, like, hey, if we get caught, this isn't going to be good. He's supposed to be in jail. He's a criminal. You're just
betrayed everybody I know.
Yeah, you're just willing to let all of that go out the window because you're so caught up in this love story. I mean, I'm sorry, but it just was very naive.
No, it's naive, and it makes me feel sad for that person that they were in a position mentally to kind of get themselves into a situation like this. And one other thing I thought was kind of odd is I think they got caught up in kind of the romance of the romantic notion of what they were doing. It's just me and you against the world, and
again, it's
they
like
were hiding out.
This fairy tale that you have to know in your heart of hearts is not going to end well.
No.
Like, you're not going to make it to some border. You're not going to be able to disappear off the face of the earth and go live your life together.
No.
Belize, or I mean, where
we live in a modern world. They get the word out very quickly. It's not the old days where if you make it to the county over, you're saved from, the next cop's jurisdiction. And they didn't make it that far away. They were on the run for 11 days.
Indiana.
They didn't make it some hundreds of miles away. I mean, I would have at least just gotten in the car and drove. and just kept driving for, days.
We're going to Mexico.
Or we're going to the other side of the country, but they were just like a state, a couple of states away.
Slipping into Canada or something.
I mean, just go somewhere where nobody's looking for you like that. But
I'm not sure why, they thought
they were hiding out. They were held. They were
the Midwest was a good idea.
They were holed up. They were, I guess, maybe having hot on the run sex.
Buy a boat and sail away.
Just do anything but that.
You'd be better off buying a boat in Florida and heading to Cuba or something.
You buy this Brock car, which that was a mistake on her part. It stands out. You stay pretty near to the area where there's, a very intense manhunt and news coverage. And here's the other thing. The dude's 6'9", 300 pounds. He stands out like a sore thumb in any crowd. I mean, it was just not going to work. There's no way.
Yeah, again, it's
sad.
It's very naive.
Yeah, I feel bad for Vicky, but I mean, she made her own bed. She made these choices.
Well, Vicky was hospitalized for her injuries, but later pronounced dead at Deaconess Hospital in Evansville hours after the crash. Vicky was buried at Center Hill Cemetery in Lexington, Alabama. Close to 200 people attended her funeral. Her supervisor at the Lauder County Detention Center, Jason Butler, told the Daily Mail, quote, "I think everyone is just tired and numb at this point. I choose to focus on the Vicky I know. She was a good friend and a good colleague for 16 years. And he's hoping that what they will all get now is closure and healing, because at the end of the day, her colleagues have to go keep doing their jobs and working day by day.
Right. And every day they're reminded of Vicky at the place where they work.
And of course, a lot of folks who are close to Vicky and, are kind of up close and personal with this story, as well as those of us who are just interested in true crime, have a lot of opinions and are a bit divided on the true nature of the relationship between Vicky and Casey. A lot of folks think that Casey manipulated Vicky, that after looking at everything, that Vicky's love was real for Casey, but that he didn't really care about Vicky at all. And then other people disagree with that. The folks who think that Casey manipulated her say, well, if he really loved her, he would never have put her in this position. They would have found another way to work it out.
He didn't have a lot of options. He was staring at life in prison. He was already looking at, on top of 75 years. He had this lengthy, they've caught him finally after a career of being a criminal. And you pointed out that after watching that documentary, you kind of thought maybe he really truly cared for her.
Well, his cellmate Tyler Purser is interviewed for the documentary, and he really believed their love was real. I mean, he said the only way he could describe it was as an inseparable love where they just could not bear to be apart, and that Casey really wanted to be able to just have a normal life with Vicky. He wanted to be able to get up and make her breakfast and just do the day-to-day things that you would do in a relationship.
Right.
That's what he craved. And I really do believe, based on what I saw, I think they were in love. I do. I feel like this guy really did care for her. The whole time he's calling her his wife, he keeps asking about her well-being. Is she okay?
Right.
And I think if he was just using her, he wouldn't have cared. He wouldn't keep asking. He wouldn't keep asking, how's my wife? Is she okay? Is she alive? How's she doing? He's just constantly wanting updates.
Well, and even the some of the recorded calls, which I've kind of felt, wrong for having listened to that, because that really is people's intimate thoughts, even though she knew full well they were being recorded. It seems kind of genuine, even though the playful talk between the two of them, and just you could kind of see their personality dynamics, the way they were interacting. I don't know. I certainly have. In the beginning, when this story happened and I just knew of it, I definitely thought he was just this,
a monster.
And he is a monster. I mean, let's be honest. He did some very cruel, horrible things.
He is, but I really thought this is a monster who's gotten this lady to help him, and he's going to kill her.
Right, at the first chance.
They'll find her body in a ditch somewhere.
And he'll take all the money in the car and do whatever he wants.
Yes.
Right, and go hurt other people.
That was my first thought.
Right. All right. Well, unfortunately, I feel bad for Vicky, and he's in jail where he was when it started. So,
yeah, so he's been charged with first-degree murder after Vicky's death following the car chase, with authorities alleging that while he didn't pull the trigger on the gun she used to take her own life, that his actions led her to doing so. Do you think that's a fair...
Well, look, I don't know how you make first-degree murder stick with that charge. If you had some kind of negligence homicide, manslaughter or negligent homicide or something like that, your actions help put this person in a position. Yeah, first degree, I think they jumped the gun on that, and I don't think you can ever make that stick.
He later pleaded guilty to first-degree escape in exchange for that first-degree murder charge to be dropped. He was sentenced to life in prison and has been prohibited from ever contacting Vicky's surviving family.
Okay.
And Casey said during an interview back in June of 2023, he said, quote, "I feel like the most hated man in the world. I loved Vicky and I wouldn't drag her name through the mud for anyone in this courtroom. Vicky took me out because she said right was right, wrong is wrong. First person to show me affection, first person to give me a hug in 6 years." And he did add that he wanted to apologize for taking her away from his family, but he said he loved her very much.
Again, I mean, it's almost like he can't get past that. The fact that she's gone, and maybe deep down he feels some guilt for having put her in this situation.
Well, yeah, and if he truly cares about her, I mean, it's got to be a big punishment to live every day knowing what happened and that you played a part in that. Yeah. I mean, I disagree with the first degree murder charge because Vicky's an adult and she very much made this decision.
She did. And
was
their
a
feelings,
willing participant in this.
And they seemed like they had genuine feelings for each other. So I mean, she made all these choices. There was no descriptions of threats or violence of any kind as far as him making her do these things or scaring her into doing it. So I think that's just they cared for Vicky as well, and I think that's just kind of a gut reaction feeling to try to maybe put all the blame on Casey. Because they still can't, they don't understand. They can't wrap their head around the fact that Vicky wanted to do this, I think.
It's a very interesting documentary.
It is.
I have to say, I've taken a bit of a step back from watching a lot of true crime. This podcasting thing, especially when it comes to, the subject matter. I mean, it does start to wear on you after a bit. And so I really have kind of taken a step back from listening to a lot of true crime and also watching true crime. And it kind of ebbs and flows for me. Definitely been in one of those moods where I'm like, I'm not really interested in listening and watching this kind of thing right now. But I have to say, it was definitely worth watching this Jailbreak because it did sort of change my mind. On the case. And
I think it's one of those docs that has elements to it that most don't have. And I think their personal calls between each other.
Yeah,
it really gave you insight.
Pretty objective. I think it tells both sides of the story, where I think a lot of these true crime documentaries nowadays, since it's gotten so popular, are very one-sided in the storytelling.
They have an agenda.
Yeah, and this one doesn't seem to do that because it really gives both sides a chance to state how they feel or what they think the relationship was, and then through the interviews and the footage and the phone calls, the viewer is able to kind of draw more of a conclusion. It's not telling you what to think.
Yeah, instead of having just a bunch of officials and people Vicky worked with saying this monster did this to her, you heard from his cellmates and other people who were like, no, they had genuine feelings, and Vicky had whatever. I think it did. I agree with you. It was well balanced, and it allowed you to kind of draw your own conclusion.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you for sitting down to discuss a Jailbreak, Love on the Run with me.
Thanks for letting me.
We have a brand new episode coming your way, and maybe our midweek will be on time this week. I don't know.
I don't know.
This one's definitely not.
No.
All right, Dylan. You have a great day.
You too.